everybody. Welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is Ed Meek from Edge Financial Advisors. Ed, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. It's a sunny day. We got a little bit of warmth here in the spring, and I'm excited. I love the springtime.
Oh, yeah, we'll take that too. We hit 75 degrees yesterday, and that was a big deal for us out here in Utah. So no, very excited for the weather to turn. So to kind of kick off the conversation, Ed, let's talk a little bit about just kind of who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today.
Well, again, my name's Ed Meek. I am what's called a certified financial planner. And when people ask me, what do? I basically tell them I help people thrive financially. Anytime there's a dollar that's involved in your life, you got to make a decision on it, whether you spend it or invest it or come up with what you're going to do with it. And I help people make those decisions and hopefully thrive. So usually people try to save for their retirement, save for college, save for a variety of different things. And I help them make those decisions and try to accomplish them as quick as possible.
Yeah, and maybe I'm projecting a little bit here, so I'll assume that maybe I am. But for a lot of people who are self-employed or small business owners or people who maybe started their business the same way that I did, which was basically as somebody with a skill, and that became my business. You know, at least in my experience, I've been probably pretty remiss in how I've been doing retirement planning and things like that. And, you know, I've heard something or I've read a quote sort of recently that was talking about that basically you can't earn your way to retirement. That basically investment and that kind of thing is the way to do it. And so I've been actually doing a lot of reading on this topic lately and trying to figure out how to make up a lot of ground for lots of years of irresponsibility. And so anyway, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, but maybe we begin with like, how do we choose the person to work with?
Yeah, I would say while it's not necessary, I think it's probably helpful to try to find someone who is what's called a certified financial planner. What it is basically like a master's in the industry. People can call themselves financial advisors, and there's lots of different types of financial advisors. And if you said, oh, do you do financial planning? Virtually every financial advisor will say, yes, we do it. But a smaller subset of financial advisors do go out and get this degree. It takes usually at least a year or two. When I did it, which was many, many years ago, 25 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that even, it took a full 2 years of passing a variety of different types of tests, and then you have to pass this really big final. So it's kind of like somebody can prepare your taxes, and they're not necessarily a certified financial an accountant, you know. And then there's also people who get masters in other industries. You usually want to work with people in various industries, or why do we go and work with anyone? We want to find the best. And getting a CFP is kind of the stamp of approval in our industry. So that would be the first way. And then the second type of thing that I would look into would be find out what are you trying to accomplish, and maybe go to their website, maybe call them up and talk to them. Do a search and see if they're an expert in a particular area. Like, for example, small business owners. You know, you'd mentioned that yourself, and I know a lot of people here do that. If you're working with somebody who's like primarily helps people who are retired or just retiring, that's a great skill set, but that doesn't necessarily help someone who's in the middle of running a business and want to do something with their business. And how do I use the business to complement? Like you said, it's not just your earnings, but your business is worth something. Everybody's business is worth something. And then how do I extract value out of the business? And how do I extract value if I'm generating revenue? What ways can I do and utilize that revenue in order to best support my situation? So some of the advice that we give, while I'm not an accountant, I do work closely with accountants. A lot of times I'll help work with the accountant and the business owner, and we as a team will come up with what are some of the best practices, because accountants are awesome in certain things. Some accountants are tax strategists. I would want to make sure you're making sure you utilize someone who's a tax strategist, whether it's a financial planner and or sometimes there's attorneys out there, and some of the accountants do that. So it's someone who can be your financial quarterback. And you want to, just like you in business, when you do a variety of different things, you want to make sure you ask a lot of good questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you know, all good advice. And that's the thing is, so I think for a lot of people, so folks that listen to this show are primarily CEOs, startup founders, young entrepreneurs, people getting into business, maybe people running their own business. And so, but a lot of them aren't getting, sort of a traditional 401k or having a plan like that that's sort of set up for them, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that your point specifically about knowing what you want and sort of planning for what you're trying to do is maybe a good way to get into this, or like a good segue into how to start to invest. Because yeah, I think retirement is a thing, and it's easy for us to conceptualize the idea of what is retirement, and just like, okay, I'm 65 and now I'm old and I don't work. But I mean, so it's easy to just kind of put in a package that this is what retirement means. But I think really what you're trying to allude to, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but it's more like, what do you want to do in retirement? Like, do you want to own a house? Do you want to travel? Do you want to keep up a certain lifestyle? Do whatever it is, XYZ, but like actually trying to kind of paint the picture of what your actual retirement looks like, or what, the end game looks like for you.
Yeah, and also like you'd mentioned 65, it's like that's a number that people have in their mind. And sometimes that's actually the perfect number for people. But what's funny is I get this question sometimes, and the question is, so can I retire, at this age, or can I retire with this sum of money? Like sometimes people have a sum of money, they think it's like a dollar value. And I always joke with them. I say, yes, you can. I always say yes. And the reason is because if you wanted to retire at age 55, I could figure it out, but you might not have very much money to live off of, right? So there's so many variables that we have to figure out. And then a lot of times it's not just a dollar amount and an age. It's what do you want this to look like? Like you, for example, how old are you right now?
I'm 45, just turned 45.
So you're 45. So you may be like in your mind be like, hey man, I could see myself doing this for 20 years or doing a certain amount of things. But in reality, we all have to have purpose in life. We all have to have things we look forward to. Most of the people I work with work towards doing something, and then they're like, yeah, and maybe it'll morph into something like this, and maybe I won't make as much. But so what we want to do is figure out like, what are you trying to accomplish in your big picture today, and in the future, what does that look like? Because retirement always isn't just like, I'm going to stop one day and I'm just going to go play golf or whatever, pickleball, whatever your love is, right? It's usually a lot more complex than that, because if you're married, which a lot of people are, we got to kind of figure all that out. So I am not just a numbers person and figuring out because I can tell you exactly. That's the easy part, is telling you exactly what is it you need to do. Stash this much away. If you're self-employed, do you actually do one of these 401k plans? Those things are really important, but it's also like figuring out what are we trying to do and put this away, but in connection with what is this going to look like for you. And you're 20, let's say you're 20 years away. I mean, I have no idea, maybe it's sooner, but let's say you're 20 years away. It's going to look different today, and then next year it might look a little bit different, and then in 10 years it's going to look a little bit. I mean, could you imagine you'd be doing a podcast like 5, 10 years ago? Like, would you even imagine that you'd be doing this? Probably not, my guess is, right?
Yeah, well, and especially right now, at least technologically speaking, there's obviously some giant waves being made right now that are going to maybe change the way everything looks in 5 or 10 years. Who knows?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and I will say, I've always had, and maybe this is too much baggage, but I've always had kind of a nihilistic view of retirement, just in that my father passed away when he was 47. I'm now 45. And so after he passed away, I was 18 at the time. And I just go, you know what? Like I had this attitude for a lot of years where I was just like, okay, well, that's going to be it for me. Like at 47, I'm toast. Now at 45, I'm going, well, man, 47, maybe not. That doesn't seem great.
I hope not.
And I don't share a lot of the lifestyle factors and stuff that my dad did. So I'm not too worried about it in that respect, that it's sort of this foregone conclusion. But the point was that I spent a lot of years living for now and not a lot of years looking at the future. And now, I've got a wife, I've got a couple kids, I've got a little bit more responsibility on my plate. I've got, my small little business here, but it's kept us going for a lot of years. And, this is sort of where I'm at presently, but we actually have a pretty well-defined idea of what we want to do for retirement with a couple other couples that are good friends and family of ours. We intend to basically build a compound out in Tennessee, and the three families kind of live together. And then as people get old and die off or whatever, we have sort of a built-in support system. And so it's kind of interesting, actually, just because there's a couple things for people who are interested or behind the curtain, we get a little bio sheet on people who come on the show, and they have some suggested questions on there. And the questions that are on your sheet are all the questions that are happening in my life right now. And so it's kind of interesting stuff, because I'm just trying to figure out how we, move forward. And like, I'm trying to help this group plan for how do we get to a compound in, at least, well, I think we'd like to be fully construction and at 55. So 10 years from today. And then, maybe everybody moved in, a few years after that. There's a few of us in the group that have to, work government jobs, and they're going to be stuck till 65. But there's a few of us that have, remote work or flexible schedules, and we can move around a little sooner. So I think, so we'd like to, be in a spot where, those who are ready to go could leave a little sooner, and those who are not, might have to wait a minute, but nonetheless, we want to get going on this thing. Right. So we're looking at a bunch of ways to do it, including, but like I say, we're in the early stages, but we've decided that we need to build businesses or passive income streams that are good for, somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 a year. And then basically the six of us can live on this compound rent free, and ride out into the sunset that way. And so that's kind of the big plan, is investments and, maybe buying some rental properties, and each of the families pooling resources and things like that. Right. And so trying to figure all that out. So before that, I didn't really have any idea for retirement except for maybe a Porsche and a beach. And now, we've got kind of this more fleshed out plan. So
is there a pond on this place? I mean, you could have a little
Lord
beach
willing,
right there.
If we're out in the middle of Nashville somewhere, it ought to be great. We want to be about 20 or 30 minutes outside Nashville is the plan. So yeah, there's got to be a river or a lake or something out there. I was advocating for beach property, but these guys want to live out in the middle of nowhere. So, but it'll work out okay. And at least we'll be near Nashville, which we love. So that'll be great. But anyway, so I guess the point of telling you all that is, that there's a little bit of a, I guess part of it is understanding what you want to do. So starting to put together kind of an idea of what retirement looks like for you. Right. And for us, it's get really active over the next 10 or 15 years and be prepared to, put the things in place that will allow us to kind of go on in perpetuity. And so for us, that's that, right? So I don't have a lot of like retirement savings. I don't have a lot of those things, but now we're trying to figure out how to begin saving and how to set aside assets, because we understand it's an aggressive goal, like we're probably going to have to either buy a lot of property or buy, acquire a business or something to generate that kind of income. But, but nonetheless, that's kind of how we're planning now. So I don't want to, necessarily put you on the spot, but I mean, if somebody was to come with you, come to you with a plan sort of like that, they've got a vision of what they hope to accomplish. We want to build this thing. We figure we need at least, $2.5 to $3 million to kind of make it happen, and basically they're starting with $0 or, some low fund, how do you advise somebody to get started? Like if they were starting with $0, how do you build?
Well, it's interesting, when you were saying that, like, because this is what I do for a living, like my mind just started going. It was like, okay, well, how many people are involved? And then, you already created some variables that we can work with. For example, that dollar amount is not something that you need today. That's a dollar amount you're going to need eventually over time. And then we got to figure out like, what's the structure? What's it going to look like? How much land you're going to need? And then how do we go about accomplishing that? And part of it's going to be you, like you said, you have a certain business, you make income. I don't know, do you and your wife make income today? We would ask all these questions, and we would do the same thing with the other people. And then what we do is, all right, what are different ways of doing it? Like you said, create passive income. Passive income could be generated. I mean, the thing that pops in people's head first is, real estate's a good option for something like that sometimes. But one thing about real estate, it can be very attractive, is that there's a factor involved that there's more work involved. So let's say you decide you want to buy an apartment building and you want to start generating an income stream off of it. Well, you have to put in a lot of work. There's a factor of like, you have to put in your own work, where there's other passive investments that you could start investing into. You could start setting aside money that you have on your own. You got to either put it in that in real estate, or you could put in other investments. Some investments don't require work on your own. So what we want to do is find out, what do you want to do? You had said maybe buy a business. What type of businesses are you looking at? So that's where we put on our thinking caps and say, where are your passions? I mean, your passion is obviously doing what you're doing right now. And then where can we extract? You're going to have to start setting aside and making commitments. You and your wife are going to have to be like, all right, we make X right now. How much can we set aside comfortably so we can still raise our kids in the current lifestyle, and what's left over? And then what do we want to do with that? And so it's a matter of choices and figuring out all the options. And what I would encourage you to do is pursue the things that you're going to have more of a passion on. If you're going to be involved and be involved, obviously with a business or something like that, then you're going to want to like have a passion, right? You don't want to buy some business. You don't want to like, I don't know. Let's say a car wash. Let's say you decide you want to buy a car wash. Well, maybe you like sounds like that's dread. I mean, you don't want to do something like that. So we would have to figure out your current situation. What does your future look like? Like what's your career path going to be for generating income, you and your wife? And then what can we do with that in the most effective way to invest it in something or things along the way to build it up? Now, that might be maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, you guys can find the plot of land and you buy it. And maybe that costs X. I don't know. You guys might already know what that is, but you're not going to need all that money up front. If you do it with other people, there might be a way of kind of that's like step one is figuring out your situation. Step two is, all right, we're working towards in the next 5 years to buy the plot of land. And then step three is we have to save up a certain amount of money in various ways in order to be able to build the place that we want to build. And so it's really kind of working with someone where you can kind of, because there's a lot of things that you already know in your mind what you want to accomplish, but there's a variety of ways to skin the cat and you might not know all of them. And so if you work with someone who can kind of help you strategize, and there's just a lot of different ways of doing it. So, there's not a one size fits all. Like what we do when we work with small business owners sometimes is they don't even know this, but they might know that they have a retirement plan. Like you had mentioned a 401k. A lot of times people think of them as a retirement plan that they can get at work. Well, they could set one up on their own, but sometimes if they're doing well in their business, there's limitations. Sometimes you could put in 30 or 40 or 50,000. It's a lot of money, but sometimes people are like, well, what if I have more money than that? There's other types of plans that you could put money into that give you huge tax benefits that you don't have to pay any taxes on. That's a much larger sum than that. And so you just don't know what you don't know. And that's why working with someone to help you figure out, like strategize and then figure out, all right, once we know that we're working with these variables, then here are our choices.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that all makes a ton of sense. And that's the thing. I mean, at least in our situation, things could be, I guess, either said easier or more complex because there's 6 of us, right? So, I mean, like you were framing that for us, it's like, okay, well, for mine and my wife's contribution, like it's an easy conversation. I just call you up, Ed, and we have a conversation. We figure out what we need to do to make our contribution to this grand plan, right? But then the complexity is, okay, well, there's 6 of us and, are we all 6 contributing money? In which case, who's investing it and how? And, and so like right now, the rough game plan is that we're all going to just start pooling assets and investing it in something, just a broad market ETF or something for 4 or 5 years. Just let that money grow because we don't think we're really going to have enough cash. I mean, we're going to start with like, $1,000 a month or something. $10,000 a year was the goal. And so if we can get this $10,000 a year to start, and then, over the next 3 to 4 years, we got $30,000. It's been growing in some stock market account for a little while and, starting to appreciate a little bit. We might have 40 or 50,000 bucks at the end that we could then dump into something, right? It's maybe enough money to make an initial investment in something, or maybe we find it isn't, or maybe it's good for a down payment on a piece of land, or, we'll figure it out. But there's so many different variables. But one of the other things that kind of came to mind while you were talking there, and it's something I've been thinking about, is that I think there's this pressure that we put on ourselves to understand what retirement's going to be, right? I mean, here I am describing this plan or this thing that we want to try and accomplish, but like, let's say fantasy world, everything works out just right. Everything's spent the way we think it is. And we need $212,000 a year to cover all the expenses. That'll pay for the mortgage, pay for the land, pay for our food, pay for everything so that we can just live happy and healthy on the compound. Well, if we only make, let's say that our total investments make $150,000 a year, well, now our 3 couples just have to come up with some money to cover that gap, right? We're not covering everything, And so I think there's this idea that we have to have everything solved and everything has to be perfect. But even if you're living off of, let's say a social security check or something like that, and maybe you're not really bringing in a lot of income, a little foresight and a little planning and getting ahead while you're working and doing that sort of thing, could at least reduce the burden that you have to come up with at the end. So even if your plan didn't go totally perfect, or maybe you didn't make totally the, amount of money you needed to make, it's not like an all or nothing kind of game. It's not like, well, we didn't make the goal, so I guess now we're all just destitute in retirement. Instead, it's like, well, no, we've built up these assets and we have this property and we have, whatever. And, so maybe we all have to contribute a little bit, or we all have to, put some money in the kitty for lunch or something. But it's like, but we covered 90% of our goal, or something like that. So I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say, or the point is that there's a, maybe we don't need to put quite as much pressure on ourselves to know exactly where we need to be at any given time. Like you mentioned earlier, just golfing. Like I couldn't imagine, I mean, I like to golf, but I couldn't imagine just like retiring and then spending 20 years golfing, this is the plan.
Yeah.
Well, or who knows how long, the rest of your healthy lifespan, just golfing, it's like, I mean, it's great, but, but it's like, I think people want to move around and do stuff.
Fun, but some people want to do it every day,
Yeah.
that we all have different hobbies, but
sure.
Yeah. I mean, some of the things to consider when you're, even looking at what you're looking at would be, the one thing you can't predict is certain events that happen in the future. So whenever you set up what you're going to set up, even initially, you want to consider setting it up where everybody's contributing, but it's going to be, if something happens, like there's always somebody could get hit by the proverbial bus. What are you going to do if that, kind of happens? And so you don't want the pipe dream to completely end if like there's a hiccup along the way, right? And so it's kind of like when we plan with couples, like every couple looks at it differently. If there's 6 of you involved, you're all going to look at it a little bit differently. So you want to have some things that you can all agree on. And if this happens, this happens. It's kind of like I started the company, I owned the company 100% initially. Now I have 2 other partners. I still own a majority of the company, but we have to be kind of aligned in what we want. And I know it sounds like you've already done this, but you want to have some structure around that too. That will be helpful. That way, if, like I said, something happens, then it makes it easy to figure out.
And actually, I mean, I know that you're a financial advisor, not an attorney, but like, as far as like structural stuff, I mean, we've contemplated what we might do, but, different people have different advice and think different things. And so, I mean, so the basic idea was that we'd put together some sort of LLC where we're all members, but to your point, I mean, we're all in our mid 40s and it's like, I don't know, there's plenty of room for wild divorces, people getting hit by cars, like people,
right.
Maybe somebody that's in the compound gets remarried, how do we parse all that kind of stuff? Like, I mean, is that structural or like, I mean, where do you set these rules? Like, do you just have bylaws around your LLC or something that sort of handle recession or whatever the word is, succession for how to, break up the business, or like if the remaining couples want to stay in the business, but maybe we don't know if we like your new spouse, so we don't want you in the business anymore. How do we what are the structural hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, again, I am not an attorney, but I've worked with these types of things before when it comes, certainly my partnership and other people who are putting things together, maybe not exactly like yours. Most of you are not going to probably be able to contribute the exact same amount. So you have to figure out, maybe you could have it structured a couple of different ways, like one LLC where everybody always says, we're going to at least contribute this. So it becomes equal. And then maybe each couple owns this equal amount. And so if something happens, then at some point in time, when something happens, like you can have it set up, like if a divorce happens, then this happens, and then, there might be, maybe you, let's say, inherit money. We're just saying one of the couples all of a sudden comes across money, or they get an increase, they make a lot more money or something. Then maybe on the outside, you also all agree to start saving some on your own, where it's kind of your own. So again, I'm just spitballing and throwing things out there. The more that you put variables in there, though, it can become more and more complex. It's hard to know and take care of every issue that potentially could happen. There's some basic issues. And then the hope is that all of you are going to be best friends for the rest of your lives.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the point is that, and you kind of mentioned it or alluded to it earlier, but it's that, this isn't like a set it and forget it kind of thing, really. This is kind of the, I mean, you need to be the quarterback or the person who's running this financial, whatever it is, this plan. And, we need to work with somebody like you and check with you each year or more often, even whatever's needed. But like, it's not, I think to your point about just stuff moving around and it's hard to plan for 20 years down the road. It's like, if you just set the plan today and then walk away for 20 years and then we decide to invent AI, like, I mean, then what happens, And so, I
Yeah.
mean, if you're not keeping your eye on these things or, trying to keep up with it, I mean, the goalpost keeps moving around. So if you're not watching, it would be pretty easy to lose sight. So even a well-laid plan early on may not be enough.
Yeah. The key to the word you kept using there is plan. Is planning and plan. And a good plan is not good if it's left, not revisited. And that's, what we encourage everybody to do. So in the area of financial planning, um, you have one very specific thing of what you want to do with these couples and what your retirement planning is, but there's a lot of other choices that you and your wife are going to have when it comes to you need to protect yourself. So for example, we do what's called risk planning for people. Like, what if something happens to you or your wife? If you're both making money, you're not going to be able to continue to contribute toward the LLC when maybe everybody else is. If all of a sudden you get disabled, something happens. And so you want to make sure that you are set up yourselves, and each of you are set up yourselves, so you plan on a personal level to protect yourselves so you can keep making income, so you can keep investing into this. And so that's some of the things that a good financial planner will do too, is kind of holistically look at your whole big picture to make sure you're able to keep stashing that money away towards this will be the one goal, right? Who knows if it's going to change, and it might change, it might be tweaked, hopefully just a little bit. But the key word is planning, is having someone who's an expert to help you kind of look at the big picture and plan all the potential events that are out there, because we don't want to have a back door where if it's open and you forgot or didn't pay attention to something and you never thought about it, and then all of a sudden it derails everything. Well, imagine if one of the couples, you get disabled, and now all of a sudden you can't do it anymore. If you have disability insurance, that's actually like one of the risk management things that most people don't plan for, is that if something happens to them and they can't make money for a while, then it just completely screws up their financial picture. And so again, I'm not saying you should have it, but I'm saying you want to make sure you look at all the different areas to protect yourselves. And that's where an expert comes in, is helping look at the big picture and think of the things that sometimes, because you want to make money doing what you're good at, and then you want to hire an expert or experts to help you make sure you're covered.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned a few minutes ago was inheritance. And what that made me think of was, okay, in small business world or in business world, a lot of people are aspiring for exits and things like that. So, much like an inheritance, maybe you come into a bunch of money all of a sudden through either selling a business, or maybe,
Sure.
I don't know, something you sell goes big, all of a sudden, and something changes for you in that way. When you go from like I don't know, let's say kind of a middle class lifestyle or something, and then all of a sudden, somebody dumps a significant chunk of money on you, whatever that amount is, what's the best way to approach getting started with it? Because it seems like that's a prime moment for people to either be smart about it and do the right thing, or do something where they end up losing half of it in taxes or something. Like, it seems like
Yeah.
there must be something to be aware of if in those types of cases.
It's hard to play out all the different scenarios in one setting. That's where I would say hiring and bringing in someone like, a certified financial planner would be super helpful, because a lot of times people in their minds, I just got this funny story. I was talking to a financial advisor recently who works at another firm, and there was a gentleman that came in with this letter, and he said, "Hey, I just keep getting this letter from you." It was a big company he works for, and this letter says that I should be coming in. And he hadn't been connected with this company in like 25 years. He had a retirement plan with this company, and he forgot about it. And the big company that he was with, that he had the retirement plan with, they kept sending him letters for like 25 years. I'm telling you, like, he forgot he had this, right? He had worked there when he was in his 20s, and he had forgot about it. All of a sudden, he comes in and he provides a letter. He goes, "I don't even know why I'm here." Well, this advisor sits down with them, looks it up, verifies it's him, and finds out, and I kid you not, he had $500,000 sitting in the retirement plan. he
Oh,
didn't
wow.
even know about. So it was kind of like getting an inheritance or winning the lottery or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
And the guy was beside himself, right? He said, I'm going to buy a boat and I'm going to go to Morton Steakhouse and I'm going to be, and I was like, that's probably not the right way to be thinking about it, because this is what happens is when we get all of a sudden a chunk of money, right? I'm sure you've done this with your friends. Like I've been sitting on a deck on Lake Michigan with my friends, and when the lottery is monstrous, like, what are you going to do? Like the first thing to do is go and talk to an expert to help you go. It's probably not right to take all the money and buy a house with it. Like that might not be the right idea. I'm not saying you shouldn't get another house, but it might not be the best thing to do is use half of it to go buy a house or something.
Sure.
And so there are just so many things it's hard to imagine like what all the variables are and the ways to potentially invest in different things and use the money, that if you're not used to it and you come across a large chunk of money, talking to an expert will help show you the different options. And there's advantages to this options, there's disadvantages. And it's not a one size fits all. Not everybody should do the same thing, because we all want to accomplish different things. Like for someone like you might be like, hey, you can go to your friends, I could pre-fund some of this if all of a sudden one of you did that. And so I think that'd be my best piece of advice. There's no way to know the answer, like a lot of the answers, other than help someone look at all the different options so then you can make a really good choice on what to do in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it seems like, one popular thing or one sort of thing that people might do would be like run out and pay off debt, things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
at least from some of the reading I'm doing, they're saying, well, maybe that's not the right thing. Like maybe you could invest that money and make more off the investment than you're losing in the debt and be better off. So I mean, to your point, I guess it's not black and white, and this is where the value of a financial planner comes in, or a
Right.
financial advisor comes in, is that, even if it's really just for spitballing with somebody that knows the ins and outs of things. And you mentioned earlier, like a tax strategist, maybe, the amount of money you would make off these investments, maybe the type of account you put it in needs to be done a certain way so that you aren't
100%.
taxed another way, or, I don't have much in terms of retirement, but I did manage to put together like a little SEP IRA, and I moved an
Perfect.
old
Yeah, that's
account into
great.
that. So I've got this old SEP IRA kicking around, and it's nothing immense. But then I'm going, well, God, with this compound coming up, like it'd be cool if I could use that money before I was 65, because I could just dump it in, or
Mm-hmm.
pay each month out of it into this fund that we're putting together, or invest in that somehow. And so now I'm going, well, shoot, but if I take it out of a SEP IRA, I think they probably tax it and things like that.
That's
So
right.
yeah. So there's probably, I mean, I don't know exactly. I know that they set up these retirement funds so that people don't pull them out, but you can probably make decisions on, is it worth eating the taxes, or maybe you can convert it into something else. I read something the other day about a self-directed IRA that maybe gives you a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more freedom in terms of how the money is invested and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, any thoughts around just types of accounts or the things that people should be using, and maybe specifically, like I say, I chose a self-employed IRA or a SEP IRA because that was something somebody told me at some point. But I mean, is that
Mm-hmm.
still the best way to be investing if you're sort of a solopreneur or entrepreneur? Like, what's
It's one of
the
them.
best route?
It's definitely one of them, but it is the SEP IRA and other types of retirement plans. The 401k fits in that, and a variety of other types fit into that. But those are earmarked and best used for if you're not going to touch it until you're like around 59 and a half or 60 years old, at least, or older. If you, and you've already done some research, it sounds like, in this, if you extract it out of there, then you're going to pay taxes and a penalty on it. So you kind of lost the big benefit that you had, which is the tax write-off. That's the huge thing. If you put in 10 grand or 20 grand, you save, two to $3,000 per 10 grand on whatever you put into it. So that's a really big deal. So what you may want to do in this scenario, and it's just one option, is potentially keep that, but maybe just not contribute to that anymore if you're going to need the money sooner. And there's some other ways that you can invest. Now, you might not get the same tax advantages, but you get liquidity, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what you might need. If you're going to want to accomplish this and do some things around this in the next 5 years and buy the land, you might not want to do this up, but you can actually buy land in IRA accounts, in self-directed IRA accounts. So there's a variety of different options. And so it might not be one option. It might be, hey, we'll keep the SEP and maybe put a little less in, and then maybe we want to set up an account that does this and all of us can contribute. It'll be connected or it'll be a little bit removed. And so it just depends. But I wouldn't willy-nilly necessarily just like cash it all in and put it into another account, because it might be better for you to kind of, it depends on, do you own a house right
Yeah.
now? Okay, so you have equity in the house. And so there's a variety of options that you might be able to utilize some of the equity in the house, the SEP account, see how they all kind of interplay with each other, and then determine, all right, going forward, I should do this. I'll kind of do this over here. There are options where people can access retirement accounts a little bit sooner without any penalties. It might not be like in the next few years for you because you're still younger, but a lot of times what we'll do is we'll help people kind of look at the big picture, and sometimes I can come up with an idea that still will make it work and you can still take advantage of the taxes. It just depends on the scenario. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, and that's the thing. So like we happen to get our house at like a 2.75% interest rate. And
that's
so,
awesome.
we got it just at the right time. And so we got this really great rate, right? So, I mean, our intention, or at least the grand plan, is like, if anything, we refinance against this property because we'll probably be able to keep that interest rate down, versus, going out and getting a loan from somebody else for something else, And so there might be a way that we can kind of leverage our good interest rate for some of these other things.
Well, that's
And,
exactly right. That's the first thing that popped in my head when you mentioned you had a house. And now that you said that, I was meeting with a client yesterday who also, he has 2.5% on his house that he bought right at the perfect time. And I got lucky. I refinanced I mean, I could have paid off my houses long ago, but I've chosen not to because I believe that, and it's worked out, that the extra money I could have used to pay down the house, I've invested somewhere else that's grown a lot faster. And that's really why you don't want to necessarily always pay down your house if you got a low enough interest rate, which you're in an amazing spot. So I would, unless like psychologically and emotionally you and your wife just like feel like you have to pay it off, it's a good idea probably not to. I mean, you could leave the extra money that you invest right now in a bank in a good money market. It pays 4%. I mean, literally with no risk, it pays 4%. So you can make more money than what your mortgage is at. So that does create a lot of flexibility if you have some equity in your house. And we can utilize that in a way that parlays you to be able to do some of these other things.
yeah, no, I think that's right. Well, so to keep the conversation going in sort of a business type direction, what are the options for, small business owners? Like you mentioned 401ks, and I guess it never occurred to me. I mean, I knew about the SEP IRA thing, but it never occurred to me that, like, even though right in my situation, it's just me and a bunch of freelance help. But, let's say you've got 3 or 4 employees and you wanted to start offering some kind of benefits package. I mean, it seems like maybe you actually can spin up a 401k. Maybe you don't have to be an enormous corporation. You can, contribute to 401ks and do these kinds of things. Even at small scales, like can companies like, let's say a company like mine, that's kind of a solopreneur thing. Like, can I do employee match and all that kind of stuff and reap any kind of tax benefits?
You can. I mean, if you're on your own, you could do a SEP, which is like the easiest. I mean, it stands for Simplified Employee Pension. So it's like the simplest one. It's just kind of like an IRA account. The IRA only lets you put in $6,000-$7,000 a year. The SEP lets you put in a certain percentage of what you make. And so usually it's a larger amount. That's why people will do it. But you can also do a 401k. There's called one person solo 401ks. They're super easy to set up. The reason people might do that versus a SEP is sometimes you can contribute more into these. It's just a different structure in a different way. And then there's another type of retirement plan that sometimes small businesses will use if they have employees, which is called a simple IRA account. And this is like an IRA, but it's with employees. Each one of them has some advantages, disadvantages. Some of them have mandatory amounts, like the simple IRA makes you put in a little bit of money for your employees. And maybe that's a good thing because it's like an employee benefit and they like having a retirement plan. And then the 401ks you could do just on your own. You can also have any amount of employees. And so depending on how complex or simple it is, a 401k is pretty easy to do as well. It just depends on how you set it up. And that's where an expert will come in and help you do that. And then there's other types of retirement plans I alluded to earlier, where if there's somebody who's making a larger sum of money and you get kind of capped at some of these retirement plans, that account is called a defined benefit plan. And that's an account where I actually have some people who stash away hundreds of thousands of dollars a year pre-tax, like pre-tax.
Oh, wow.
Like most people don't know they can do that. And that's if they're in a special situation, but it is doable. And when you do something like that, literally, like when I set these up for people, sometimes I'm able to help them retire 2, 3 years earlier than they normally would have. And it's only because we're just saving so much money on taxes. And so good growth, good investments is certainly a very important thing. Uh, Saving money on taxes along the way is just as, if not more important. And then structuring your investments and how you're going to do it in certain ways is just as important as well. And so it's the interplay between all of these different things. And so that's why, um, that's why a lot of times you kind of talked about this really early in when we were talking, which is, you started a business, you put your head down, you're plowing towards, like, it's awesome. I mean, you're making money doing what you started doing, and that's great, but you want to make sure you lift your head up sometimes and go, all right, well, I don't know what I don't know, and I want to start figuring out what I don't know. And you don't have to become the expert on your own. If you find a financial planner, you find someone that can help you work through these things, just a few small tweaks might all of a sudden, a lot of times I'll be like, by us doing this for you, if you do this and implement it, you might save a couple grand here. And then over here, we might save 5 grand over here. And then, you start saving 5, 10, $15,000 a year in taxes. You do that for 10 or 15 years. I've just helped somebody retire a year and a half sooner than if they weren't talking to an expert, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it actually kind of leads into what I was going to ask, which is we spend a lot of time talking about sort of the two ends of the spectrum, right? Retirement accounts that you can put money into that you can't touch till you're 65. And then you've got sort of the, I guess, let's just call it the entry level, which is just like, let's call it just a brokerage account, standard, you're paying taxes on everything, that kind of deal. So, and like I say, as somebody who had sort of a nihilistic attitude about life for a lot of years, for me, the idea of saving till 65 is like, well, 65 is not a foregone conclusion. So that's silly. So is there such a thing, or are there accounts that are sort of these middle ground strategies where you could, and maybe it isn't just a 401k, but maybe it's more of a portfolio management type of approach. But like, I mean, is there something you can put money into that you can withdraw at 45 or that you can withdraw at 55? Like, do they make investment accounts that sort of cover all that middle area that you're not necessarily held out until retirement?
Yeah, I think you're thinking along the right tracks. The one thing I'll clarify is there, I actually have this chart that I'll show people. It shows all money that we have, no matter if it's in a house, it's in crypto, it's in any investment, stocks, real estate, or whatever. It fits into one of three buckets from a tax perspective. The first bucket is what we call a taxable bucket, meaning you put the money in there. As it's growing, you pay the taxes. It's completely liquid. Or you buy it in index fund, let's say, and it's growing, and the growth on it, you pay taxes when you sell the index fund, but it's taxable whenever you make gains. And the tax code is a little different depending on the investment you have, but it's liquid and there's no penalties, and it's not like a retirement plan that you have to leave it in there. So that's one bucket. That's the best bucket for money you need to access before kind of retirement age. And usually the most common retirement age is without penalties is 59 and a half years old. I don't know how they came up with 59 and a half, but that's what the tax codes say for like 401ks and IRAs, things of that nature. That's that middle bucket. The middle bucket are these retirement accounts, 401ks, SEP IRAs, even this defined benefit plan I had mentioned, various things like that. You got a tax break when you put it in, just like your SEP IRA. You get a tax break while it's growing. It grows tax deferred, but then the government wants the money when you pull it out, and you pay taxes on it when you're retired. The third bucket is what we call tax free. That one most commonly is called a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k bucket. This is money that you pay taxes when it went in, but it's earmarked for retirement, and it grows tax free once it goes in there. So you don't get the tax break like the middle bucket, but you do get a tax break while it's growing. Now that has some rules. They want you to leave it in there for a while, usually not to access until you're retired. And so what we like to do is say to people, all right, if you have any money in investments, where's it all at? Which bucket is it in right now? And then which bucket do we want to help you contribute towards? So like for the compound idea with your friends, you might want to start focusing. You've got some money in the SEP IRA right now, so you got some money in the middle bucket. Well, maybe we want to put some more money in this bucket over here where it's liquid. There are some retirement plans I had mentioned earlier, like some 401k plans are actually accessible at age 55. So you can get all those tax breaks, do the middle bucket, and then when you reach age 55, then you could pull the money out of a 401k. It's a little bit sooner than the SEP IRA, some of the other ones. So that's where we're starting to look at taxes. We're starting to look at investments. We're starting to look at which areas do we want to put them in. And it's not one size fits all. Sometimes we might want to utilize a few different buckets. And then lastly, you had said like a self-directed brokerage account. What investments you're going to put it in, you could do in any one of these buckets. So you almost got to look at it as like the retirement accounts is just a tax play on what am I doing, but the investment world on what I'm going to invest it in, it could be in any one of the buckets. So the sky's the limit. You can own index funds in any one of them. You can own real estate in any one of them. You could buy individual stocks in any one of them. You can buy crypto in any one of them. And again, I'm not making any recommendations on what somebody should or shouldn't buy, but it's a lot more flexible than people think. The key is where should I own it and how should I contribute how much to each one when I'm trying to accomplish certain things.
Yeah, it seems like it's maybe more of a strategy, or what you're buying is liquidity, right? And so you're getting a kickback or a discount in the form of tax, advantages in
That's
those
right.
the bigger plans. So the most liquid, you get the least tax benefit on, no tax benefit.
Right. No
And
tax benefit right away,
and
and
then
the
the
least
stuff that you
tax
have
benefit.
to keep locked up the longest amount of time, you get the most, but it's also the least liquid. It's stuck until
That's
a
right.
certain
That's
time,
right.
or you're going to be penalized if you touch it.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so that
That's
makes
right.
sense. Or, I mean, I think that's a good way to frame it, is thinking about sort of, I guess you're buying flexibility, and so, some of this money I can kick down the road, some of this I can't. So, but the benefit is that, and I guess it makes sense, right? That's how the government or whatever is getting their piece, is they're keeping it into an account longer and probably earning some money off it on the backside or something. So
Yeah.
somebody's getting paid, like nobody's going without. So
Yeah, you're right. And look at, I mean, I did the same thing. So 20 years ago is when I started my company. I was working at a big company called Fidelity Investments. That's where I became a certified financial planner. They were an awesome company to work for. They're a great, great company. I eventually wanted to get out of the corporate world, do my own thing, be able to roll up my sleeves and work with people a little bit more in detail. There was this period of time where I didn't put any money into retirement plans, just like were saying. Like the reason is because I invested in myself. So wherever we all invest in something. And so I wasn't making as much money for a while, but I invested my time and my efforts into Ed. And then Ed was able to grow the company, get more clients, which represent a value. And then eventually down the road, I started generating enough money where I could start doing a retirement plan and start contributing towards a retirement plan. And so it just depends on the person's situation. Sometimes it's best not to do a retirement plan for a while because you have to invest in yourself. Like your podcast, maybe it doubles in the next year. If it doubles, that represents something. That was a great investment versus extracting some of the money out and investing it in like a SEP, or there might be a combination of both, right? So we're all investing our time and our resources in something, and we just got to figure out what's the best way of doing that today. And sometimes that looks different than in the future. But when people have done well and eventually their business is doing well, then it's like, all right, what can I do? I do have extra cash flow. What should I do with it? Maybe it's a 401k plan. Maybe I do something else with it. But then that's where we want to say, okay, what's the best way of taking advantage of taxes? Where should we invest it? What kind of plan should we have? And then also, how can I poise my business to potentially, maybe I want to sell it in 3 or 5 or 7 years. There's a lot of different types of things that somebody can do to poise their business so they can extract as much value out of the business then as well.
Yeah, well, and on something like that, where you've sort of, I guess, created an asset out of whole cloth, let's say, like for the self-employed person who's just kind of built their business. I mean, when it does come time to sell, like, I guess I don't know. I mean, do they just hit you with taxes on that kind of stuff? Or like, I mean, what happens when you actually do make the exit? Like, I mean, are you then paying tax again on this thing that I invented out of thin air? Or, even though you've been paying tax the whole time? Or how does that work? And maybe that goes back to kind of our questions about the inheritance or big lumps of money.
Yeah, I would say for a business, there's two things. One, the value you've paid yourself income and or profits out of a business. You certainly are paying taxes on that, but that money's outside of the business, and then you're spending it or investing it or doing something with it. But if you're fortunate enough to have the type of business that has value, meaning if somebody wanted to buy it, then once you sold it, you you would have to pay taxes, but there's also a key to, do you want to sell it all right away or do you want to sell it over a period of time? Because if you sell it over a period of time, then you don't have to pay the taxes until you extract it out. Then you want to make sure you also sell it in a way where you minimize the taxes, because we are taxed in various ways depending on how we extract things. So if you could sell it in the form of what's called capital gains tax, then that can be lower. The capital gains taxes, the most that you would pay is in the low 20s on capital gains taxes. The highest tax bracket for when you make income is 37%. Plus, if you live in a state that I live in the state of Illinois, 4.95%. So income for somebody who's at the highest bracket in the state of Illinois pays, in the low 40s. But if they can get the money out in the form of capital gains, it might be 15 or 20%. So we have to make sure we sell the business in a particular way where we can lower the taxes when it's coming out. And also, a lot of times people will sell their business and not necessarily get the entire lump sum right away. Now, sometimes they will, but if you want to get the entire lump sum right away, you got to give it a little bit of a discount. If you're willing to sell it over a period of time, then the people who buy it, they might give you a little bit more money, and then you can spread it out and lower some of the taxes because you're taking it out over a longer period of time. So those are just some things that people need to take into consideration, and it's a way that they need a consultant to kind of help them figure that out.
Yeah. I think maybe the last thing I want to try and get into, we're starting to get to the end here, is leveraging debt. So you always hear these things about, like, the rich and famous have, a stock holding or something. And then instead of spending that money or whatever, they're just borrowing other money. So they're, taking a bank loan or something and leveraging that
Right.
against this asset so that they're not having to, I guess, cash out, pay capital gains or whatever, I guess is the idea.
That's
or
right.
what they're trying to avoid. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that game that people play? Because it seems like you could also get yourself in trouble, I guess, if that asset went, it bottoms up or something and decided that, whatever asset you've borrowed against, all of a sudden you owe this whole loan back or something. I mean, there's got to be negatives to this, but there also must be a reason why the rich and fancy are doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the one that comes to my mind first is real estate. So let's just say you want to buy a piece of real estate. Let's just say it's I'm going to use $1 million just because it's an easy dollar amount to think about. Well, a lot of times you don't need $1 million if you want to buy an apartment building that has 8 units that's generating income. So what you might need is you might need $100,000 to buy it. Still a lot of money, but some people might have the $100,000, and then they'll borrow the $900,000. And let's say they run the apartment building really well. They're getting all this income. They're using the income to like pay for their regular expenses, to pay for the mortgage on the $900,000, and to do upkeep. And let's say they don't need the money like to live off of, but they're investing in this property. And let's say they do that for 10 years. Well, real estate on average, goes up. It grows, right? I mean, just look at, I don't know, the area you live in. I'm guessing 10 years ago, the house you live in costs a lot less money. Area, same with mine. Most parts of the country work the same way. That $1 million apartment, if you're investing back into it, might be worth $2 million. How much money did you put in? You put in $100,000. Okay, I'm using an extreme example,
Sure.
but this is pretty common. Along the way, that $1 million property is growing. Let's say when it grows to $1.5 million, you say, man, this thing's working pretty well. I want to buy another apartment building. The bank looks at you, and by then you might not have a $900,000 mortgage anymore. Maybe you've got $850,000 mortgage, $800,000 mortgage, but they go with the property's worth $1.5 million. You have $700,000 of equity in that. You put $100,000 in. That's a pretty good investment, isn't it? Right? You put $100,000 in. You had some sweat equity, right? So you had to work at it, but it's worth a lot more money. This is how people will be able to utilize what they have and they have assets that are pretty stable, right? You can't do this with things that are wildly fluctuating, but real estate is, that's why a lot of times people will do really well with real estate is they buy real estate and if it's a good investment in real estate, they put a small amount down, but the real estate is growing because it's $1 million investment. It's growing at $1 million. It's starting at $1 million and growing off of the million. It's not growing off of the $100,000. So they're using this leverage, and banks don't mind, and they like to lend because the bank will lend off of that, because the bank will have access to the entire $1.5 million investment, because they know that if you default, they could sell the property and their mortgage is covered.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one example, right? I mean, it's hard for me to play out every example, but
Sure.
that's why people who have investments will use those investments. And as long as they're like a decent stock or a solid company, the bank will lend off of that so they can buy other investments. And if they're decent at investing, then those investments are growing and this investment is still growing. They just have to make sure that they get a decent loan rate. I mean, they're not paying 2.5% right now. If you and I could get a 2.5% loan, that would be amazing, right? They're more than that. But at one point in time, when rates were so low, it was just happening so frequently. It was such an incredible investment opportunity, and it still is today, even if you have to get a mortgage on a piece of real estate. But that's how it's utilized, is it's using certain investments that are relatively stable to buy more investments, and then you get kind of a double compounding effect.
Okay, so that's sort of how these people that, there was a little bit of a run there while real estate was affordable and gettable and had good rates, where people were just kind of scooping up houses. So all of a sudden you'd have these people that had 4 or 5, rental homes or, Airbnbs or different apartment complexes they'd buy or whatever. But I guess that's how they're doing it, is they're just leveraging one against the other.
Well, they're doing that, but also they're investing into the property so that it's growing. Now, it can work in reverse. Like you said, if you get what's called over leveraged, then the bank calls you, and if your investment went down, like there's no guarantees in life. This is what happened in 2008 and 9. I encourage anybody who's remotely interested, even if they're not interested in this, there's a movie called The Big Short that played out and showed what happened in 2008 and 9 and why the real estate markets collapsed. And it was because there was too much lending going on to people who really didn't have the ability to lend, and they weren't using these as investment properties in the right way. And there was a variety of factors that caused it to happen. But it's an example of, if you don't do it the right way, you could just wipe everything out. Everything's gone, because then you start leveraging, your investment goes down, and now you're in a bad way. So you have to be a good investor. You have to do a good job of working at whatever you're going to put your money in, or making sure you do a good job of investing in what you're in. And so there's no free lunch in this world. But people who are good and they don't borrow too much, if they're decent at investing in it, it can really grow and compound on their own behalf.
Well, and I suppose if you're smart too, there must be some sort of like breaking point where you go, okay, well, all of a sudden I don't need to borrow anymore. We have enough money in the bank. I can just buy another property. So there must be some version of that where, you buy 3 or 4 properties and you've got enough income now that you can start to, finance yourself, I guess, so to speak.
Right.
So cool. All right. Well, Ed, it's starting to get to the end of the hour. Do you want to take just a quick minute, let people know where they can connect with you, learn more about the work that you do over at Edge, and anything else you'd like to share?
Sure. Yeah. I'm based out of Illinois in the Chicagoland area, but I work with people across the country. The name of our company is Edge Financial Advisors. Our website is Edge FA, EDGEFA. I do a podcast like you do. I haven't got as many episodes out as you. We usually put out at least one a month, and we've been doing it for a number of years. And what I do is podcast just around all the stuff you and I were talking about, just different areas of financial plan, all the questions that clients and prospects have asked us over the years. And we bring on experts once in a while in various areas that are connected to us. And so feel free, you could check that out and learn more. We got a lot of great content. And our office, you can look it up on the website, and our office number is 630-221-1000. And that's the best way to reach us. And I think you get a good idea. I'm a financial planner, and we help people walk through all these different types of scenarios.
Well, and I'll just kind of mention too, I was looking at your website before we spoke, and one of the things that I saw that I thought was really cool is you've got a team of people, obviously, and there's a number of different disciplines that look like across
Hmm.
them. So a few people do different things and stuff like that. So it seems like you guys working in close proximity with people with different types of expertise, so more than just being just a strictly a financial advisor that's going to have, a certain package that we sell, or this is the thing that we do. It seems like there might be a lot more room to sort of customize or tailor people, like this guy's a real estate dude, this guy is somebody else, and you bring these
Hmm.
different experts in, to help you sort of build a more comprehensive package. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you and I both know you can't be an expert at everything. So I'm really good at what I do. And if I come across a scenario where somebody needs help in an area that I know a lot about, but not some, then we always bring in another expert and work as a team to help them out.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Ed. I appreciate you taking the time and, making time to hang out this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Take care now.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.